Hi, this is Craig Urquhart, and welcome to another episode of Berlin Conversations. Today I'm fortunate to have my friend Stefan Riethauser here, highly acclaimed filmmaker amongst many other things. Stefan, welcome. It's really great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
It's great that you're in Berlin long enough that I can get you on. Yeah.
Yes.
Because you've been so busy this past year. But before we go into the last few years, you've had a very long and distinguished, interesting career starting at a very early age. You started in radio, and first of all, you're an educated lawyer. So how did you end up as a filmmaker? And maybe you can give me a quick journey. Yeah.
Well, filmmaking was always a dream of mine. But I didn't think it was possible somehow. It was to remain a dream. And I was pushed into a more traditional way by my family. I grew up in the suburbs of Geneva, Switzerland, in a very bourgeois environment. And I studied law, and I was supposed to take over my dad's tax accounting company and my uncle's lawyer's office.
Knowing you, that would have just been so much fun for you.
Well, maybe I would have done a good job. I don't know.
I don't know.
But probably I would have been quite unhappy.
Yeah, I think you probably would be.
But then I finished my law studies anyway, and I became a gay activist because this coincided with my coming out. And I realized that I could do, in my position in Switzerland, I could do something for the LGBTQ community, and which I did. First of all, I went to Spain, and then I went to Paris, and then I spent 2 years in New York, and I worked for a publishing house, and then I worked for a gay rights organization called GLSEN.
GLSEN, which is a great organization.
Yeah, the Gay, Lesbian and Straight Education Network. And I learned quite a lot there. I was the executive assistant to Kevin Jennings. And after 2 years, I came back to Switzerland, having learned a lot about gay activism, and I launched a similar organization over there on the national level to fight homophobia in schools. And I launched my own little company called Lambda Education, and I gave seminars in schools about sexism and homophobia and how it affects all kids and grown-ups, and trying to break that taboo. And this was more than 20 years ago.
Right.
So no such thing existed in the educational world. We were beginning to talk about gay marriage, and even we didn't think it would be possible to have gay marriage one day. 20 years later, there we go. Even though in Switzerland we still don't have the fully equal rights.
It took Germany a while to get the full
Also,
equal rights too.
Yes. But anyway, I was active for the gay community for many, many years. And on the side, I worked as a teacher in elementary schools, and also I taught French to refugees in Switzerland to make some money. And I was selling my seminars here and there. And then I published a book because I felt that I needed to express myself also artistically. And I published a photography book about coming out. And I found 30 kids between the age of 15 and 25, young people in Switzerland, in all regions, that were ready to tell me their coming out story and be photographed. I wanted to make a statement about visibility. I wanted the shame to go away and say, these kids live here, girls, boys, or in between, they tell their story. Nobody will be able to say, it doesn't exist here anymore, it's only in New York or in Berlin or in London. No. These kids live here, and they have the right to develop according to their feelings. They have the right to be safe in schools. This was my message for many, many years. And this book was the first of its kind in Switzerland and got a lot of attention in the media. And I became sort of a spokesperson for the gay movement, also with my past activities. But inside of me grew a frustration. It was like, okay, but actually I wanted to be a filmmaker. This was this dream, but this has all been possible. I made it somehow. So why would the filmmaking not be possible? And I started to look into that direction, but I had no connection, no education. I was thinking of going to film school, but I was already 28, 29, 30 almost. And I found an internship here and there, and I started to work my contacts. It came through the Montreux Jazz Festival, where I worked for one summer, and I met many people there, and this matched my artistic ambitions a little bit more, and it became clear in my mind that I wanted to do something in the artistic world, if not as an artist, as some kind of producer or event manager or something like that. And I did some internships here and there for newspapers also. I worked for Montreux, and I met some people there that slowly made me think that maybe it could be possible one day. To make a long story short, it took me another 4 years. But then I applied, I saw an ad in the newspaper, and I applied for a training or an internship at Swiss Television. This was in 2003, and miraculously it worked out. They hired me, although the competition was very high and there were a lot of people wanting that job, and it was a paid position, and they would train you for a year and a half and then hire you as a film and television director.
That's what an opportunity. Yeah.
It happened to me, you know. I had barely been an assistant in a little shooting of a school project of a friend of mine that I had met in the meantime, but I became a TV director, and I stayed at Swiss Television for 5 years and did many, many things. I had the best time. I could travel around the world. I went to Africa, I went to Canada. I was in Paris all the time reporting about culture, dance, theater, cinema. They sent me to the Cannes Film Festival. I was able to network my way into the film industry in Switzerland, covering events such as Locarno or the Solothurn Film Festival. And in my mind, I was like, one day, I love this job, but one day I'm going to be on the other side of the fence. I would like some people to interview me about my films. It's happening today.
And I couldn't be more pleased.
Thank you, Craig.
So when did you move to Berlin? Did that sort of coincide with your filmmaking career?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, after 5 years at Swiss Television, I moved to Berlin. And I made a move. I resigned from my position. Some friends, some colleagues of mine said, "Are you crazy? This is an amazing job. A lot of people dream of having that job." And I was like, yeah, but this is satisfying, but not enough to my standard. And if I stay there, it's going to be a comfortable life with very decent money, but I'm going to be stuck in that big company doing interesting projects though, but not mine. And I wanted to express myself artistically a little bit more. And I went to do my first fiction short film. And Berlin, on a private level, had always attracted me like a magnet. I have a German mother, but I had never been to Berlin until the wall came down in 1990. And I remember celebrating my 18th birthday on the Kurfürstendamm in Berlin. It was 1990, just after the wall came down. And at first the city seemed a little gloomy and strange, and I must say I didn't have the intention of living here. But I came back just a few years later in the early 90s. I had a friend studying here, and Berlin became hype. And I started to go out here also. I discovered the nightlife, and this city offered more space, more freedom, more opportunities for me than any other city. And I became to fall in love with Berlin in the 90s and had the idea of living here one day. But I didn't know in what position, financially, how was it going to survive, or, you know, I was undecisive. And I was like, I have And this was before my job at television. So then I was almost ready to move to Berlin in the early 2000s, but I found that job at Swiss TV. So I stayed, and then in the back of my mind, it was always, okay, one day you're going to go to Berlin. And in my mid-30s, I was 36, it was 2008, I resigned and I said, I'm moving to Berlin now. And I took a one-way ticket and stayed here ever since. And I think it was one of the best decisions in my life on a private level, also on a professional level.
And for me,
yes.
I got to meet you.
Exactly, and you meet such amazing people from all over the world, artists, and this is what was missing in my life in Switzerland. I would always go from Geneva to Paris, here and there, but always come back to my base, which is, Geneva is a great city, and I have fantastic friends there and great family also, and I have tight bonds with Switzerland still. But I needed a bigger city, and Berlin offered crazy gay nightlife, which was important to me. Freedom, sexual freedom, artistic freedom, amazing spaces. I could afford all of a sudden a 100 square meter apartment, which was twice as big as the one I had in Geneva, with a balcony for less money that I was paying over there.
I know exactly what you're talking about there.
You know, and then you balance all these out, all these facts out, and you're like, okay, this is a great quality of life. And very quickly, I met very interesting people and started to have a cultural life, a boiling life, also a nightlife, and a lot of time to work. I did many translations for Swiss television as a freelancer, which paid very well. And I started to develop my projects. And this took quite some time because it's different than in television where they give you the production means and you can, you know, your films are produced immediately. You're being sent to Paris for a week to shoot something, a little documentary, a little report. You're flying back. And now I was on my own with my own production company. So it took me about a year and a half to gather the money and find the right way to do my first short film, which is called Prora.
I remember this process.
Yes, yeah. Well, we were very close back then, and already. And my first short film, Prora, was shot in 2011.
And so tell us a little bit about the film, because it was also filmed in a very unique location. And
Yes.
it's a great story. And it's very popular, too.
Yes, it's incredibly popular today, even still today, I want to say, because it's already 7 or 8 years old now. And
it's a very sweet film, very
Yes.
touching, and so now tell us
I
a
can
little
tell
bit.
you, I can tell you a little bit about it, because I was working on the script in Berlin, and my script was the typical story, of a first film of a gay director somehow, but not only gay directors. I mean, usually the first films are about teenage, coming of age, teenage love, your first big emotions. So in my case, I created 2 film characters that were had a little bit of my personality, each of them. It's pure fiction. But it was a little bit classic, and when I showed it around at first, we're like, it's so common. Oh my God, another coming out story, really. And one day, as I was working on the script, I read this article in the paper about Prora with a panoramic photograph that took like 2 pages of the paper.
So could you explain what Prora is?
And Prora, I discovered because I had no idea what it was. This name was a mystery. It didn't ring any bell in my brain. I learned that the Nazis built this amazingly long building in the 30s in order to turn it into a holiday resort, so that the Nazis could even control the population during their holidays. And it's almost like a city in one block. It's actually 10 blocks of 500 meters. It's 5 kilometers long. So it's more than 3.5 miles long. You have to imagine that. It's along the seashore. and it contains 10,000 double rooms, and it was designed to host 20,000 people. But the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939 and didn't have time nor energy nor money to invest in Prora anymore. The war started, and this building was never completely finished. And then it was used as a refugee center during the war also. And when the war was over in 1945, the Red Army, the Russians, came and occupied it. And they first tried to demolish it, to destroy it, and they destroyed one block. And it took them so much dynamite and so much time and so much effort and money that they said, okay, this is insane. This building is so big that we're going to leave it as it is, and we're going to give it over to the new East German army. So the National Volksarmee from the GDR took over the building, renovated it, and it served as an army headquarters for the East German army until the wall came down. And a lot of people were sent there. Soldiers, of course, but also all the boys that refused to carry a weapon during GDR times. And they were sentenced to go there, and they basically worked as slaves for the regime over there for almost 2 years. It was a very long period. And this whole story fascinated me because this building symbolized, in a way, the suffering of many generations of men, the workers who were forced to build it in the first place, and then these boys who had to serve there against their will. And it was also served as a training camp for communist terrorist groups, or even the Palestinians have trained there, I've read. I researched a lot. Anyway, almost exclusively males were in that building. And I noticed it was abandoned. It was abandoned in the early 90s after the wall came down. And it was empty. And I made some research on the internet, and I saw pictures, and I said, this is a cinematic set that is absolutely fantastic. And its history will give, or could give, a whole new perspective to my very simple story. So I decided to stage my coming of age story, which is a basic friendship story between two boys, one in love with the other, questioning himself, am I gay? The other one thinking he's straight, but maybe not. You know, this typical game of the teenage years. And I set the story there. And it took indeed quite a new dimension. Just in that setting, it was a very tough shooting. I had some money to do it, so I had a great director of photography. I had two great actors, and the film came out in 2012. I made more than 130 festivals around the world. Right. I won 15 awards with it. And now it's on YouTube with millions and millions of views all over the world. Just yesterday, I've been asked by a Russian YouTube channel that want to take it and translate it into Russian to make it accessible to the Russian LGBT community. And I just uploaded it, the Prora with Spanish subtitles, exactly 2 weeks ago. It reached 500,000 views.
It's incredible.
I don't know what's going on. And teenagers from all around the world, they're mostly teenagers, but not only, can identify with it. And I'm talking about 14-year-old boys from the Philippines, or from a country in Africa, or from Uzbekistan, or from Pakistan, or from Brazil, where they have such a homophobic president now. And it's a way for them to find to themselves, thanks to a little short film that is 20 minutes long.
Well, you've obviously touched a nerve, and it's helping people too. But it's also just a wonderful film, and I recommend to everybody to go on YouTube and look for it and see it. It's a wonderful thing, and you know, I'm so happy for you because it was your first big project, and it was so successful. So that led you to move on to some other projects. One was about a very interesting cemetery here in Berlin.
Yes.
And that's called the German words?
Garten der
Sterne,
Sterne.
the Garden of Stars.
Yes.
Right. And that's another very beautiful and touching and emotional film. And it's told like a story, like you're reading a book. Am I sort of correct in that?
Absolutely.
And could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the funny thing is, right after my short film, Prora, because of its success, I was approached by a producer in Switzerland who offered to shoot my first fiction feature film, to produce it. So I worked on that for about a year and a half, and I'm going to make a long story very short. It didn't work out. In the end, we got into an argument and we didn't want to make the same film. But a year and a half had passed after I had already spent a year traveling around with my film around the world. So we were in 2014. And I was like, I haven't shot anything in the last 2.5 years. What's going on? And my friend Pasquale, that I met also in Berlin, a fantastic...
He's been a guest on the show, yeah?
True, yes.
Yeah.
And Pasquale, a fantastic screenwriter and dear friend of mine, told me about this cemetery that is not far from his home that you can actually see from his balcony. And told me one thing, the Grimm brothers are sleeping there. And they've been buried there. But also a lot of gay men are buried there, a lot of gay men who died of AIDS in the 80s and 90s. And some Berlin celebrities, and apparently there's this cafe on the ground of the cemetery. Let's go and check it out. There must be a story to tell over there. And indeed, there is a big black book in the cafe where you can find all the gay people that died of AIDS. And you can see that book in the film.
Unfortunately, a friend of mine is buried in that cemetery.
Yeah.
He was one of the first because it was the only cemetery that accepted AIDS victims. Am I correct in Berlin?
Yes, I think you're correct.
Yeah.
A lot of people were afraid of that, and they were afraid just of gay people.
Right.
And then Bernd, our main protagonist in the film, who is running the cafe, funnily tells the story in the film that at some point the administrator, the guy in charge of the cemetery, was seeing all these gay people being buried there and was afraid that it was going to become a gay cemetery. But then Bernd laughs at it and says, well, how can a cemetery be gay? Do they have a sex life? Do I have an orientation? It happens to be in the neighborhood of Schöneberg, where the AIDS epidemic hit very strongly because all the gay men were living there and found to themselves there. It was a safe heaven that turned into a deadly heaven. But with Pasquale, it's Pasquale's idea, the film. It's his idea, and he told me about it, and I said immediately, I'm so tired of not shooting anything. My project is not working out. Let's start tomorrow. And Pasquale was there at first. No, but it's too early. I need to find a concept. We need to write the thing. It was like, I don't care. I take my camera tomorrow. We go there. And so we did. And Pasquale thought it was too early. I started filming. And I met some drag kings that day on the cemetery. 3 girls dressed in drag as boys who were throwing glitter on the grave of Ovo Maltine, a famous drag queen in Berlin that died of AIDS about 15 years ago. This sequence is in the film. And I started spontaneously, without knowing where we were heading to, with my camera. And then over the course of a year and a half, we filmed there regularly and found our protagonist who told us the story of the cemetery. And also, we're privileged to have the one and only Zazie de Paris telling a Grimm fairy tale in off. She's our narrator, and she tells it with great talent, with her unique voice. And it was supposed to be a short film. It became a film over 60 minutes long, and that made it to the cinema.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big surprise because we made it with no money, with our pocket money, so to say. We invested a lot of our energy, but it was a big surprise and big satisfaction to see that it found its audience. Also, I mean, it's a small film, it's a modest film, but it won also awards. It was on many, many festivals, and it was released on DVD. We were super happy about that experience.
Well, it's a wonderful film, and it's so touching to watch. And you go through so many emotions when you watch it, because it's sad without being sad. It's depressing with being hopeful, and you capture so many different emotions in the films that sort of sum up what a cemetery can do. Mm-hmm. And there's also a segment about the children's cemetery.
True. I forgot to mention that. Mm-hmm. This cemetery is special because there's a section dedicated to stillborn babies. And there was a legal problem with that. It's been solved now to some extent, I think, in Germany. I don't know all the details. But a stillborn baby was dead when it was born. So it was never really born. So it did not have an identity seen from the administration. Mm-hmm. So it could not die because it was never born. So it could not be allowed, because it had no ID, to be buried. So these stillborn babies were put into the trash in the hospitals. And this was neglecting. It was terrible for the parents, and who had carried for almost 9 months a baby and already had a name and maybe a little bed, and all of a sudden the baby dies. It's a big drama for parents. So this cemetery, and Bernd, our main protagonist, offered funeral services for these specific cases. And unfortunately, this happens every week, everywhere around the world, even in Berlin. And this section has grown and grown in the last couple of years. It doubled its size since we shot the film, even.
Really?
So there is a little part about that, and it's very moving. And it's moving also to see how Bernd, our main protagonist in the film, managed to teach a new way of thinking death, and also he's trying to break the taboo of death. It's a big taboo in our society. Nobody likes to talk about death, and he can talk about it in a very natural way that makes you feel comfortable. And also he says we need to break that taboo regarding children. Children need to be told what death is, and they soon realize it. You can tell them with very simple words, they understand, and we're always afraid of telling children the truth, or, oh, it's not for you, or you're too small. And it's true that some things can traumatize children. But with simple words, you can tell them about death, that, Uncle Paul died, and now we're going to put him under the ground. And Bernd says in the film that it's the parents and the grandparents that are afraid, and but they're afraid for themselves, and they're uncomfortable themselves addressing the issue with the children. And there can be made a parallel with the way, and I'm thinking of my previous work, and it's still my work, the way we deal with children regarding homosexuality and sexuality in general. We think, oh, no, it's nothing for children, and until they're 15, we can't say a word about it, and we think they know nothing, and they should know nothing. Come on, we've all been there.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And we're very curious as kids, and with also simple words, I think we could address the topic of sexuality and all kinds of sexualities with children, with the appropriate word. And this still frightens many, many, many people around the globe. And this is a topic I want to address in one of my next projects also, the sexuality of children, which is super, super delicate nowadays, because immediately people think of pedophilia and how is this possible, and people just run away if they don't become aggressive. You know, it's a very delicate subject, but specifically for that reason, I would like to address it.
So your latest project, which has just taken off around the world and become extremely, even more successful than the other two, but extremely successful, a very moving film, and it's a very personal film. It's about you and your grandmother, and it's called Madame. Am I correct?
Yes.
It's about much more than that, but she was obviously a very important mentor in your life, and it's a very personal film that speaks to so many people. So, how did this project come about?
Well, it's funny enough because of my fiction project didn't work out. Because my fiction project didn't work out, we started Garten der Sterne with Pasquale, and in parallel, I started to work on this grandma project that I had in my mind, but it was always meant as a side project, a little film that I wanted to do for myself and maybe for my family. And anyway, I started watching videotapes I had recorded of my grandmother before she died. And I found some precious sequences. And I had the idea of working on a film about the condition of women. And my grandmother had an incredible career, and to just summarize it in 3 sentences, she was born into a poor Italian immigrant family in Geneva, Switzerland. She was forced to be married when she was 15. She did not have the right to go to school. She wanted to play the piano. She was not allowed. And she was married to a guy she didn't love. She was forced into sexuality and had her first child when she was 17. And when she was 18, she had a divorce and was repudiated by her family. And after that, she embraced a brilliant career. She started as a hairdresser in her own apartment, and then selling corsets, and went into fashion, ended up having the Queen of Italy as her client, and made a lot of money even before the war in the 20s and 30s, had her driver's license as a woman back then, which was exceptional, and went on a brilliant career. And she was a big influence. She was the incarnation of flamboyance, she had a lot of humor. She had this extraordinary willpower. It's like anything is possible if you work hard enough, she always told me. But also this respect of destiny. And she said, oh, you know, the big decisions in my life, I never made them. It all came by itself. It fell from the sky. I was like, very romantic, dramatic, funny, interesting, fascinating figure for me. I was like, how can I tell her story? This was my aim. And I started to research every document I had about her, because she died in 2004. But because I didn't want to forget all the stories she was telling me back then, I had recorded her with my little video camera. And I like to record archive material. I'm an archivist in some way. And I was watching these tapes and was like, what could I do with her? It was a long process. I started 5 or even 6 years ago. But in the end, I realized one key thing. My grandmother had to fight the system she was born in, a patriarchal system. She had to fight her father. She had to distance herself from the values of her family, of the Catholic Church, of the social and even legal norms of the time. She said, I don't want that. In order to be free, I need to break free from that. In order to be free, I need to say goodbye to my family and to embrace, find a new way, which she did. And as far as I'm concerned, I have no intention of putting myself in the film in the first place. But it ended up as a conversation between my grandmother and myself in the film, because I realized that 2 generations after her, I was born a man in a very privileged environment with access to education. I was encouraged to study, to learn, to be cultivated. I was sent to America to learn English. I was giving all these opportunities that my grandmother never had. But I found out I was gay. I liked men, and this mere fact made me have to fight the same system my grandmother had to fight in order to be free. I had to fight patriarchy also. I had to go against the expectations, the hopes of my family, of my father, of these norms, the whole pyramid of values that defines masculinity was destroyed by one word in my family when I said I am gay. And I understood that in my personal story that homophobia is linked to sexism, and it's these views, these rigid, sometimes very rigid moral views and expectations we have of what a man needs to be and what a woman needs to be and how they need to behave. And it was interesting for me to analyze all the codes, all the values that shape us as men and women. And within my own family, I decided to use my grandmother as a character and use myself as a character and the other members of the family to try to say something about the way we are educated as a boy or as a girl. As far as I'm concerned, as a boy, and I was lucky enough to have a lot of magnificent film images, film footage that my dad shot in the 60s and 70s. And I shot a lot of video material myself as a teenager with my dad's video camera. I loved it. And I had this incredible archive, and with these archive images, I recreated a conversation between my grandmother and myself. So she tells me her story, I tell her mine, and it became that film, Madame. And it started as a very personal project, also small scale in a way. I mean, and in the course of the process, I realized maybe it could speak to a broader audience, and because we all have to deal with our identities, and we all have to find an identity and to deal with, you know, what it means to be a man or a woman or in between, or trans people. All this is very important, and it comes out to the light now. And I think it responded to a need some people had to a lot of young people, but not only young people, question themselves, you know, in their sexual orientation and their just male or female identity. And this film allows you to have a look in someone's life and also backstage and what's going on in the head of a little girl of that generation of my grandmother, or in my case, of a boy who grew up in the 70s and 80s. And apparently it speaks to a lot of people. And honestly, I did never expect that. But this film has been received so warmly, and it's been 9 months now that it's been released on festivals. I got many awards also. I've been invited all over the world. In America, I was in New York, I was in Taiwan, I was in Canada. The film was shown in India. All the European cities invited me. It's been released in the cinemas, which for a documentary is pretty rare. In Switzerland, in Germany, next in France. I'm getting invitations. In the last week, I was invited to Tel Aviv, Barcelona, maybe Hong Kong. I mean, it's going on. It's crazy. And what makes me so happy is that a lot of people come up to me and say, "Thank you for sharing your story. It was very courageous. It made me think of my story, my family, how to be a better person, how to be more honest with myself," or it allows apparently people to reflect on their own stories. And it's a happy film. It makes people happy. It's very emotional. Apparently, people cry, people laugh. I got all these reactions, and I'm as a filmmaker, there's nothing better you can wish for than a happy audience in a theater filled. So, yeah, it's happening. It's like a little miracle.
Well, I've been to screenings and I've experienced that magic, and it's really wonderful. And I'm so happy for you because this is something that you really wanted to pursue, and it's been so successful for you. And one of my favorite films is the one you made of Sasha and Mai's wedding.
Yes, I make also other films
Yeah.
that have not been released for the general public.
But that was, it's so moving, and it was very sweet of you to do that. And
it was a great pleasure doing it.
And
also.
we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And people that see that who weren't able to be there with us on that day have been extremely touched and moved, and they feel like they were there with us. So.
I know. I had told you guys that it was going to be my wedding present.
Yeah.
And at first, when I was shooting it, sometimes you're annoying people, be like, "Oh, what is he doing with his camera the entire time?" And I mean, everybody was absolutely nice and no issues with that. But I know it can be annoying. It was like, "Oh, come on, participate now. Enough of filming." But I wanted to film it. It was also a beautiful wedding, super moving. Everybody cried, and it was absolutely wonderful. It was a gorgeous day. I remember in that garden and at the Savoy. And I know because I did that with my grandmother. I did similar films for the birthdays of my German grandmother also. That made so many people so happy. And with the distance, because the first of these films I made more than 20 years ago, it is an incredible memory that stays forever. And you will see probably in a couple of years from now, you will look back and it's like, "Oh my God, it's been 10 years and look where we are now with Sasha. And look, how these people..." It's a fantastic memory to have, I think.
It is, and thank you.
I'm so happy.
And
it was a great joy doing it.
Yeah, and even on our first anniversary, we watched it, and it was a very emotional time, and we're extremely grateful for that. So it's been a pleasure having you. I mean, we could talk for hours because you have so much to say.
Like we've been doing all these years.
Yes. And I just want to thank you for coming by. And I encourage everybody to go on, are all 3 films on Facebook? Madame isn't yet, is it?
Yeah. Prora, my short film, is on YouTube, on free access.
YouTube, I meant, yeah.
And the Garten der Sterne is on the web. If you guys want to see it, just write me an email and I'll give you the password.
Okay, and which one is on Netflix?
Not on Netflix for now.
Okay.
And Madame will be released in France and on DVD in March in Germany.
Oh, excellent.
And it's going to be released in the cinemas in France and also on DVD there. It's going to be on VOD. It's going to be all over the place. And
that's
someday,
excellent.
Yeah, but it's going well.
And the website is?
madamefilm.com. Madamefilm in one word, .com.
Okay. So, thank you so much. Pleasure, as always.
Craig.
And love you so much. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please be sure you like the show and subscribe to it so you don't miss any of the upcoming interesting guests I will be having and sharing with you. And do visit my website, www.craigurquhart.com, to learn more about Berlin Conversations, my music, and be able to download some of my music for your pleasure. So thank you so much, and we will see you at the next Berlin Conversation.